So here's something that happened in December 2024 that should have been front-page news everywhere, but barely registered in public consciousness. China announced new export restrictions on 17 rare earth elements. Not oil, not semiconductors, rare earth elements. Obscure metals with names most people have never heard. Dysprosium, terbium, neodymium, europium. Just a bureaucratic notice from China's Ministry of Commerce. Dry language, technical specifications, export licensing requirements. Within 72 hours, Pentagon officials were in emergency meetings. European defense ministers were making urgent calls to Beijing. Japanese technology executives were calculating how long their stockpiles would last. And quietly, desperately, Western nations realized they had built their entire military capability, their entire technological infrastructure, and their entire energy transition on a supply chain they do not control. Let me explain why this matters, because if you don't understand rare earth elements, you can't understand how power actually works in the 21st century. These are not luxury goods. These are not commodities you can substitute or do without. These are the elements that make modern civilization function. Neodymium creates the permanent magnets in every electric motor, every hard drive, every wind turbine. Dysprosium allows those magnets to work at high temperatures. Europium produces the red phosphor in every LED screen you've ever looked at. Terbium is essential for sonar systems and solid-state lighting. Yttrium is critical for missile guidance systems and jet engine coatings. Without these elements, F-35 fighter jets cannot fly. Precision-guided missiles cannot guide. Smartphones cannot function. Electric vehicles cannot be manufactured. Wind turbines cannot generate power. The entire technological foundation of modern military and economic power depends on access to these materials, and China controls them. Not most of them. Not a large share. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth mining. But more importantly, more decisively, China controls roughly 90% of rare earth processing. That second number is what matters, because rare earth elements don't come out of the ground ready to use. They have to be separated, refined, processed into usable materials. And that processing infrastructure, those specialized facilities, that technical expertise, it's almost entirely in China. The West spent 3 decades outsourcing rare earth mining and processing to China. The reasons made sense at the time. It's expensive. It's environmentally destructive. The ore contains radioactive elements that have to be managed. Local communities oppose the mines. Regulations make it difficult. It was cheaper, cleaner politically, and easier diplomatically to let China do the dirty work. So Western companies closed their rare earth operations and sourced everything from China. And now, China has a monopoly. And monopolies create leverage. And leverage creates control. And control creates power. In 2010, China briefly cut rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute over the Senkaku Islands. It wasn't a long embargo, just a few months. But Japan's manufacturing sector nearly collapsed. Electronics production stopped. Automotive plants couldn't get the components they needed. Within weeks, Japan backed down on the diplomatic issue. The lesson was crystal clear. China could turn off the tap anytime it wanted. And when it did, modern economies stopped functioning. Since then, China has only tightened its control. Western countries announced plans to develop alternative sources. Australia has rare earth deposits. Canada has them. The United States has them. Everyone promised new mines, new processing facilities, new supply chains. But here's the problem. It takes 10 to 15 years to bring a rare earth mine from discovery to production. It takes another 5 to 7 years to build the processing infrastructure, and every attempt to compete with Chinese production faces the same challenge. China can simply flood the market with cheap rare earths and make any Western competitor economically unviable. It's not a free market. It's strategic resource control. China operates rare earth production at a loss when necessary to maintain market dominance. Because it's not about profit. It's about leverage, and the leverage is becoming increasingly decisive. Let's talk about the military implications first, because this is where the immediate crisis exists. Each F-35 fighter jet, America's most advanced combat aircraft, contains 920 pounds of rare earth materials. 920 pounds. Each Virginia-class submarine uses approximately 9,200 pounds. The U.S. military's entire modernization plan, hypersonic missiles, directed energy weapons, advanced radar systems, electronic warfare capabilities, all of it depends on rare earth elements that come from China. Pentagon officials realized in 2024 that if China cut off rare earth exports during a Taiwan conflict, the United States couldn't manufacture replacement weapon systems. Not in months, not in years. The strategic reserve, the stockpiles maintained for exactly this kind of contingency, would run out in 18 to 24 months of sustained high-intensity conflict. After that, America's technological military advantage doesn't degrade, it disappears. Because you can't build the weapons systems without the materials, and you can't get the materials without China. Think about what that means strategically. The United States has spent decades and trillions of dollars building the most technologically advanced military in human history. But that technological advantage is now dependent on continued access to Chinese rare earth elements. China doesn't need to match American military technology. It just needs to cut off the supply of materials required to build and maintain that technology. It's an asymmetric advantage that neutralizes decades of American investment. And it's not just the United States. Every advanced military in the world faces the same problem. European defense systems use rare earth components throughout. British, French, German weapon systems all depend on Chinese rare earth processing. Japan's self-defense forces, South Korea's military, Taiwan's own defense capabilities, all of them require rare earth elements that come through China. The irony is almost too perfect. Taiwan, the flashpoint everyone worries about, the place where a great power conflict might actually occur, Taiwan's defense against Chinese invasion depends on weapon systems that require Chinese rare earth materials to manufacture. If China blockades Taiwan, it simultaneously cuts off the rare earth supply needed to build the weapons that would be used to break that blockade. Now let's talk about the energy transition, because this is where the long-term trap closes. Every Western nation has committed to net zero emissions by 2050. The European Union has legally binding targets. The United States has committed to massive reductions. The entire developed world is racing to transition away from fossil fuels. And that transition requires rare earth elements, massive quantities of them. Each wind turbine uses up to 600 kilograms of rare earth magnets. 600 kilograms per turbine. To meet climate targets, the world needs to install hundreds of thousands of new wind turbines, each one packed with neodymium and dysprosium. Electric vehicles use rare earth magnets in their motors. The global transition to electric transportation requires millions of vehicles, each containing rare earth components. Solar panels, energy storage systems, grid infrastructure, all of it requires rare earth elements. The International Energy Agency estimates that the world will need 7 times more rare earth elements by 2040 than we currently use. 7 times. And nearly all of that increased production will come from China unless something dramatic changes, which means China controls whether the West can meet its climate commitments. That's not an exaggeration. That's math. You cannot build wind turbines without rare earth magnets. You cannot build electric vehicles without rare earth motors. You cannot meet climate targets without China's cooperation. So now imagine you're a European policymaker. China invades Taiwan. The United States calls for sanctions. Do you join? If you sanction China, your green energy transition stops. Your climate targets become impossible. Your automotive industry can't build the electric vehicles you've mandated by law. Your defense industry can't manufacture the weapons systems you need. Your technology sector can't produce the components it requires. But if you don't sanction China, the transatlantic alliance fractures. The United States questions your commitment to shared values and mutual defense. The entire post-World War II security architecture starts to break down. You're in an impossible position, and China put you there deliberately by controlling the rare earth supply chain. This is what strategic resource control looks like in the modern world. It's not about oil fields you can invade or shipping lanes you can blockade. It's about controlling the processing infrastructure for materials most people don't know exist, but that modern civilization cannot function without. It's invisible power, but it's absolute power. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. China isn't just controlling supply. China is increasing demand. The Chinese government subsidizes domestic rare earth consumption. Chinese industries use rare earth elements in products they export globally, which means Western countries become dependent on Chinese-manufactured goods that contain Chinese rare earth elements. Even if you tried to build your own rare earth supply chain, you're still buying Chinese products that contain those materials. It's a strategic trap with no easy exit. The United States has one significant rare earth processing facility, Mountain Pass in California. It's operating at partial capacity and produces only a fraction of domestic needs. There are plans to expand. There are plans to open new facilities. But those plans take a decade to implement. And during that decade, Chinese control only deepens. Europe has zero rare earth processing capability. Zero. 100% dependent on imports. European leaders talk about strategic autonomy, about reducing dependence on authoritarian regimes. But when it comes to rare earths, Europe has no autonomy. None. Every wind turbine, every electric vehicle, every defense system depends on Chinese rare earth processing. Australia has rare earth deposits and has been trying to develop processing capacity. But Chinese companies keep buying stakes in Australian rare earth projects. Not majority stakes. Just enough to complicate things. Just enough to maintain some degree of control. It's economic warfare conducted through market mechanisms. And China is playing a long game. In 2023 and 2024, China started stockpiling refined rare earth elements while simultaneously restricting exports. They're building strategic reserves of processed materials, which means even if Western countries somehow manage to build alternative processing facilities, China could flood the market from stockpiles and make those facilities economically unviable before they reach profitable production levels. The restrictions announced in December 2024 are just the beginning. China is testing the limits, seeing how the West responds, measuring the economic pain, calibrating the pressure. Each restriction is a reminder. We control what you need. And you have no alternatives that won't take 10 to 15 years to build. So what are the options? Option 1. The West accelerates rare earth production and processing dramatically. Pour massive government subsidies into an industry that isn't profitable at market prices. Accept the environmental damage, override local opposition, build the mines and processing facilities even though they'll lose money for years. It's possible, but it requires political will that doesn't currently exist and investment on a scale that governments are reluctant to commit. Option 2. Diversify supply chains. Source rare earth elements from multiple countries to reduce dependence on China. But that runs into the same problem. Most rare earth deposits outside China are small. Processing infrastructure doesn't exist, and China can undercut prices any time it wants. You end up with the same bottleneck, just in a different location. Option 3. Develop alternative technologies that don't require rare earth elements. Research magnets that don't need neodymium, motors that don't need dysprosium. It's theoretically possible, but current alternatives perform worse and cost more, and research timelines are measured in decades, not years. Option 4. Accept Chinese dominance and try to manage the relationship. Don't provoke confrontation. Maintain stable ties. Hope that economic interdependence makes China reluctant to weaponize rare earth access. That was basically the Western strategy for the past 2 decades, and it led directly to the current situation where China has decisive leverage and is increasingly willing to use it. There's no good option. Every path involves massive costs, long timelines, and uncertain outcomes. And meanwhile, China's control deepens every year. This is the rare earth chokehold. It's not a future threat. It's current reality. Right now, today, the West cannot build advanced weapons systems, cannot achieve climate targets, cannot maintain technological leadership without Chinese cooperation. That's not interdependence. Interdependence implies roughly equal leverage. This is dependence, and China knows it. Every new export restriction China announces is a demonstration of power. Every licensing requirement is a reminder. Every bureaucratic delay is a message. We control the elements. Literally. The components of the periodic table that make your civilization function. And you chose to give us that control because it was cheaper and easier than maintaining it yourselves. The question now is not whether China will use this leverage. The question is what they will demand in exchange for keeping the supply flowing. Access to Western markets, technology transfers, political concessions on Taiwan, recognition of Chinese territorial claims, a free hand in their sphere of influence, all of the above. The rare earth chokehold is the most decisive form of strategic power in the modern world. It's invisible to most people. It's boring to explain. It involves elements nobody can pronounce. But it determines who wins the 21st century. And right now, China is winning. Not because they have the largest military, not because they have the biggest economy, because they control the materials required to build the technologies that define modern power. The West handed China the keys to the future, and now it's discovering that getting those keys back is going to be extraordinarily difficult, extraordinarily expensive, and extraordinarily slow. If it's even possible at all,